Is Ukraine's counteroffensive stalling, or are they just preparing their next move? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's May 14th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. But first, of course, you guys may know that the national security news space is full of clickbait and fake stories. How many times have you read an article that China's about to invade Taiwan when it's really just some PLA exercise? Well, I am launching a newsletter. It's totally free, called the Strategic Sitrep. Every week, I give you the actual relevant stories. Sometimes they're national security stories that aren't widely reported but are really significant to people in the know. And sometimes we filter through the clickbait to get to the truth of a story. But we are here to give you guys the facts and none of the extraneous clickbait. If you're interested, the sign up is in the description, or you can go to strategicsitrep.com/subscribe. Anyway, taking a look at the control map. First off, you can see that, as we talked about there, Ukraine is holding its positions after making significant gains to the north and south of Bakhmut, crucially freeing up the routes, resupplying troops engaged in the defensive in the city center. This has been a really vulnerable area for Ukraine, and so it makes sense that they are going to clear out some breathing room, so to speak. As I've also talked about, I think the units involved in this are probably what are called IBCTs, infantry brigades. They probably are not very mechanized, and so you're not going to see the sort of lightning advances that you generally get when you have a tank and infantry fighting vehicle formation. Instead, these are formations that are going to advance at the speed of, at most, the speed of walking, which is measured in, a few kilometers a day. So managing those expectations, what have we seen in the last 24 hours? Well, it seems like Ukrainian forces have somewhat stabilized their advances. They've seemed to have slowed. You can see to the north here, right, Russian forces being pushed back just a little bit from this forested area. You can also see just slightly less areas listed as contested, but the actual change to Russian lines in the last 24 hours appears fairly minimal. Now, when we look at the combat map, you can see Russian forces launching 57 different attacks, very concentrated here. It looks like they are really pushing to try to conduct spoiling or blunting attacks to Ukrainian forces to stop their efforts to advance. You can see this reporting actually has Russia using this reservoir here as a sort of blocking position. But that, again, depends on exactly who's doing the mapping. You can see here, right, this shows greater Russian control of that same reservoir. But the idea, the fundamental reality is that Russia's trying to push back on Ukrainian forces, it's like trying to jab a boxer who's coming forward, launching, throwing big strikes. If you can pop them in the nose, you can sometimes disrupt that whole sequence that they're trying to run. And that's what Russia's trying to do here with these hard counterattacks. They're trying to blunt Ukrainian efforts to continue to advance. And that's a good strategy, even just to delay, because other Russian forces are probably trying to establish fighting positions where they will be harder to dislodge, where Ukrainian forces will have to regain their momentum trying to break Russian lines. But it's tough to know, right? Russian sources have said that there's around over 1,000 Ukrainians involved in this assault, which is, again, at most one brigade. So 1/13 of what Ukraine is hopefully going to be able to bring to the fight here. So I would be reluctant to say that the advance has stalled. I think this is a normal sequence of events. And again, this may be part of a shaping operation. So it's possible that Russia's very limited reserve force has been committed to this fight to stabilize these lines. And if that's the case, the next place Ukrainian forces strike are not going to have the same level of combat reserve to draw on. So this is the danger of to Russia in the face of this of really almost a dozen fresh brigades waiting to be deployed against them. When we look at the MOD for the UK, they point out that, again, the Russian Combined Forces Group still has over 200,000 personnel, about 70 brigades with 5 different force groupings. But in February 2022, this consisted of professional soldiers with more or less modern vehicles, right? They engaged in regular combat exercises and were trained in some level of joint operations. Now, of course, that same force is likely poorly trained mobilized reservists and increasingly with antiquated equipments and understrength units. Its offensive operations, when they're conducted, are simple and infantry-based operations. I'm reluctant to call them simple, while the low-skill light infantry are certainly given tasks appropriate to their level of training, which are usually very, very low complex assaults, so usually frontal assaults, like a direction and go. They are part of more complex operations. And I think it's dangerous to sit there and say that the Russians are simple or that their tactics are crude. They're not. We did an earlier video where we looked at the Russian assault battalion or assault company concept. And the assault company concept or assault group is actually pretty advanced, right? It involves sort of, yes, a large number of untrained conscripts, but it involves a fairly complex integration of fires that prepare the battlefield so that these light infantry can engage in it can be effective, right? A lot of enablers have to come into play. Indirect fire, mortars, thermobaric rockets, tanks can all sort of shape conditions so that the low skill light infantry, the mass waves of people, have a fighting chance against a trained and fairly well equipped and fairly well trained defenders in the form of the Ukrainian forces. So again, I understand this is like a talking point that you see in a lot of media that, again, calling Russian tactics simple. They're not. They are complex tactics that take advantage of the resources Russia has, which is a lot of untrained infantry and a much smaller number of support personnel, mortars, artillerymen, tankers, etc. But it's true that the combined grouping of forces is unable to generate a more capable mobile reserve force, and it's definitely going to struggle to conduct military operations at scale. The problem is, and we've seen that, right? For 6 months, Russia's been on the offensive, but its offensive has produced little gains anywhere outside of Bakhmut and Soledar. And the entire Russian war machine, right? One of the largest militaries, and prior to February 2020, believed to be one of the most capable militaries in the world, is now reduced to literally being able to take a salt town. That's the highlight, guys. It's a salt mining town and the bombed out shell of Bakhmut at tremendous cost. So, we can acknowledge that they don't really have the capacity to engage in complex brigade size operations that look anything like what we expect from NATO countries or even Ukrainian military with whose troops have had a expedited but proper level of training. However, Russia isn't on the offense right now. They're on the defense. And when it comes to defensive operations, it is way, way more forgiving of low training conscripts, right? When you're a conscript, right, you don't need to advance when you're on the defensive. You just need to hold a position, engage targets as they appear. And when the pressure gets too high, you need to understand how you're going to withdraw to your secondary positions. Very simple stuff. And so the conscript role, the mobilized soldier role, is going to be much more effective for Russia now that they're on the defensive. So again, if you take anything away from this video, it's that you shouldn't count Russia out. You shouldn't believe the rah that you sometimes see by some media outlets, the like blindingly pro-Ukraine stance. The truth is that Ukraine still probably has its work cut out for it, though Russian forces are really attrited. Even the head of the Wagner Group is in some statements admitting that the Russian forces are probably not up to par. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Of course, I would be remiss to not thank all of my supporters, our lieutenant tier members at combatvetnews.com. This is my exclusive site. Thanks to all our colonel tier members. And of course, be sure to check us out at strategicsitrep.com /subscribe to sign up for free. I'll see you guys in the next one.